for the love of reading. So, today we are going to talk about our beautiful memories we had as readers and then how you could recreate some of that with literature. And we're going to get into all the details about our range of our reading history. Okay? Stick around and get the tips you need to make sure your child can fall in love with reading.
Hi, thank you so much for joining the Falling for Learning podcast. We have this podcast to help parents and caregivers with having the resources, strategies, and tools needed to make sure that their children are on track for learning and to stay on track for success.
Welcome, Miss Moseley, for coming on to our show. We're going to get into a conversation about the love of reading and all of like these beautiful books that we used to read when we were kids.
Yeah.
So, what was one of your like favorite books as a kid?
You know, I think I shared with you before, I was not the best reader, but I loved Dr. Seuss. I think that was one of the first books that I could read. I think it was Cat in the Hat. And I really loved it because it rhymed and the characters were silly, and the notion of a cat in a hat and, green eggs and ham and just the ridiculousness of it. So it just kind of took the pressure off of me feeling like reading had to be serious and you had to read correctly and you had to have the right pacing and you had to say all the words correct. It just made reading fun. And it
Okay.
wasn't pressure. It was just fun. Good old fun silliness.
That is such like a key ingredient, right? I think um, you know, there was an author that I heard speak and he was saying how a lot of people, if they're choosing books for kids, it's like serious books or like important information or important message. And when they were, you know, asking kids like, what do you want to read? It was like funny, gross stuff.
Hmm.
That is, fun, gross, entertaining. That's the
Right.
stuff that they like, maybe a little scary, like things are on the edge. So
Hmm.
I think one of the key ingredients for helping your child to fall in love with reading, and especially in the summer months when they have a more extended time to read, is just thinking about their choice and thinking about what might be fun, interesting, funny, and
Hmm.
even gross, right? Don't think in terms of like, I'm not interested in it, like, not about what you're interested in, what they would be interested in. Taking them
Yeah.
to the library and being able to explore, taking them to
Hmm.
bookstores. I say the library, I mean, keep it cheap, but if you have to buy it, I guess so, but I would
Yeah.
say library. There's unlimited and then you'll get tired of the book or you'll read the book, you'll look for another one and there's more. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that's
How
really
about you?
interesting.
What was your favorite
Okay.
book?
So, I really like if we're thinking about early readers, I was a I can read books person, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
um what we didn't have, like remember I grew up in Alaska. We did not have like the Sweet Pickles books or whatever. But when I watched PBS or whatever that was I was watching and they were like Sweet Pickles books or something. I was like, "Mom, I want those Sweet Pickles books." Like I wanted it. I even said like, "Thanks, Mom, Sweet Pickles." And my mom hated it. Later on, she told me she hated it, but I loved saying that. And but I never
Mhm.
had the Sweet Pickles books. I found some in a library or like in a school library before, but we didn't have Sweet Pickles books. But I did get the I Can Read weekly reader
Mhm.
books. So I
Yeah.
did convince my mom to get the book $7.65 per pack or whatever. I don't know. We got the little books. They came in a little box. So that was really exciting to me,
Yeah.
to get like these weekly reader books. And maybe they came once a month or twice a month. I don't know.
Hmm.
But I love those books. There was like a little bear and um there were several little bear books. I can't
Was it a
remember.
series? Was it a
It was
series of
no. They were like book makers. You know how they have like those golden books and they had like the little
oh, the
so it was
little gold?
Yes,
Like the
there's
little.
little golden books, but these were
Mm.
called weekly reader books. And you could
Oh.
just, it was kind of like, I don't know if you guys know about like those CD book, the once a month CD
Oh,
that came,
right, right.
but these were like once a month
But
books, or
uh,
they call it weekly readers, but I don't think they came every week.
right.
Or if they, I guess you could choose the frequency or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So that was
Hmm.
what I really liked. I really liked those weekly reader books, and they were like an I can read book, like they were leveled. And then I also was able to, my mom and I were talking about how to bump it up when it got a little, when I got, you know, to a different stage of my reading
Right.
development, right? I was like, oh, these are kind of easy. So now I could do my own like book because I'm good at it. You know, I'm better at
Mhm.
reading. So I know Little Bear was part of them, but for what? Oh, the Frog and Toad. Frog and Toad was
Oh,
in that set
yeah.
as well. So
Right.
those were a couple of the, so it wasn't a book series. It was kind of like a book maker or a publisher or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Right.
so I got those books, and those kept me engaged, as well as the library. Yeah.
Do you
So
remember getting highlight books? Do you remember the highlight magazines? I specifically remember going on Saturday to the beauty shop with my mom, and they would have all of the magazines. And sometimes in those magazines, they would have in the magazine rack, it would be highlight books. And it was basically a kid's magazine. It had articles about, I don't know, nature. And then sometimes it would have cartoons and it would have puzzles.
yes,
Do you
you
remember
threw me
that?
off. Yes, you threw me off when you said, "Do I remember getting the highlight books?" And I was like, "No, I didn't
No, I
get
never
those
got
books."
them.
So now,
They were,
what you're saying, yes, I would see them in different places. So I
yeah,
feel like maybe
dentist
my
office.
teacher had it in there. Maybe they were in the dentist's office. Yes,
Right.
they were different places. So
Yeah.
yes, I do remember that. But when you said, "Do I remember getting?" I'm like, no. Mm-mm.
No, I don't
I
think I
I
ever.
can't believe I got the weekly reader books because I feel like we were like a little struggling, but my mom, I mean, that was one thing that I could kind of guilt trip my mom into. And I've talked
Mhm.
about this a little bit before, is like, I need these books. Like, mom, I need the weekly reader. I
Right.
need
Right.
And
Do
I
you
was not a kid that asked for a lot of stuff either.
Mhm.
And my grandmother was also one who pointed that out. Like, you don't really ask for a lot of stuff. So, like, if you ask me, I'll give it to you because you don't ask for a lot of stuff, you
Oh.
know? Um,
I was
because I,
always asking
because
for
I
stuff.
kind of feel like I felt like, okay, we're struggling a little bit. But when it came to the books, I was like, I need this book. This book
Right.
I need. And pretty
Right.
much if I asked for a book, they gave it to me. But I did do a lot of library books, right?
Mhm.
But certain books I liked
Yeah.
getting in the mail and stuff like that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember we had and I think they still have the where you order the books and you send in your money and you give it to your teacher
Yes, book
and
orders. I
book
love
order.
that. Every once in
What
a
was
while,
that called? Was it
like Scholastic or something like
when
that.
we were younger, it was Scholastic? Yeah. Yeah.
I think so. I think Scholastic has cornered the market, and Scholastic, if you want to sponsor us, we're here. Let's do it. No.
Right, right. Let's do it. Because I know I got a lot of every time there was a Scholastic book order,
Yeah.
I ordered tons and tons of books. And again, I wasn't a great reader, but I remember um, being very interested in, and I understood that reading and writing had power. Um, I
Mm.
even remember being super young and my neighbor next door, this little old lady, I think her name was Mrs. Gordon. And I told my friend, hey, I'm going to write a letter to Miss Gordon and ask her for candy. Now, again, barely knew how to read, barely knew how to write, but I took a piece of paper and I wrote loops of what I guess were cursive E's. And I just said, Miss Morgan, we have been very good today. Can we please have candy? And I just figured if I spoke while I did that, that's what it said.
Hold on one second. No, why was Miss Morgan the one you were asking for candy?
She was always home. She was the little old lady that lived next door, and she was always at home. She was always outside on her little front porch and, sitting out there sweeping. And I just would always see her, and I just felt like
She
she
should be
just
able to get candy,
she looked
but
like some. She may have given me candy at one point, and I just
maybe
figured
she's now the source of candy.
now my
Okay.
source. Candy, yeah.
Okay,
So
okay.
that was a motivator for me to learn how to write because
I
I really
did, yeah. I was very fluent in the loops as well, right? That was cursive writing at one point, the
right.
loops. Loop,
Yeah.
loop, loop. And this says
Mhm.
this. And you just
And then I
explain it to
realized,
people.
right, and I realized that it did not say what I thought it said because when I gave Miss Morgan my letter, she looked at it and smiled and closed the door and didn't come back out with candy at all. So I figured I need to really learn how to write
The power,
because
the need to communicate was there,
right,
right?
right,
Because you did
the need
not get
there,
your request fulfilled.
right,
Okay,
right.
okay. All right.
So books were my thing, and I even have my mom keeps everything, and
Okay.
if you go and look in her attic or open up some of those boxes in the garage, some of my old books are still there.
Okay.
Literally keeps everything.
So an early author. Okay, we're hearing more about your gifts. Okay. So I talked about early books, like those weekly readers, but
Mhm.
what really helped me with reading, like really drew me in further into reading was like those Judy Blume books. I did go through
Yeah.
the I did go through like the Beverly Cleary books, like Ramona and Beezus. They were very funny. But I
Mhm.
think Judy Blume, she would write about things that I wasn't ready to talk about. But of course, I was
Oh,
thinking about it. I was curious about it. You
mhm.
know, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. One of like my favorite. My parents were like arguing at the time, and I have this book where people's parents are divorcing and you know,
Mhm.
it even helped me like to like as my parents were arguing, there was like a split between my parents for a little bit. I was feeling a little bit matter of fact, like it's kind of
Mhm.
happened sometimes. It
Yeah.
happened differently in my family, obviously, than, obviously there's going to be differences, but it made me feel like I could handle this or like, this happens to other people,
Yeah.
So I think that, liking boys. I think there was even a
Mhm.
chant, I
I
must
must.
increase my bust.
Yes.
Yes. So
Yeah, I
like these
remember
are
that.
things
It
that
didn't
little
work.
girl, yeah,
Yeah, it didn't work.
no, I did not, no. But just knowing that someone else out there, because that's
Mhm.
very embarrassing to talk about that you want
Yeah.
bigger boobs or you want
Right.
boobs, right?
Right.
Um, and then like just the weight, right? And
Mm.
then other people they're popping them out, and you're not getting them popping out,
Right.
not, but you could just see them developing, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
And I was waiting to develop, and it was like taking forever, and of course, forever, maybe
Right.
6 months when you're 12, or
Mhm.
you're like, like, is it here?
Yes.
Are they here yet? Are they coming yet? Are they, you
Right.
know? But I didn't have any growth spurts. I'm a pretty small person. I've been small, and I'm the person who wears out my clothes. I don't really grow
Mhm.
out of clothes. Like once I'm
You
done
just
with it, yeah, yeah. Once I am done with them, I've had them so long. When I was a kid, that usually nobody else would have them because I didn't really have growth spurts. I grew,
right.
grew small, a little bit. So it was
How
a lot of waiting. I didn't have a growth spurt,
right.
so it was a lot of waiting and I would feel like other girls were just overnight, I felt like I noticed that they had some development and I didn't.
You're
Mine was
like, "What
very
do you mean?"
snail pace for me. So Judy
Wow.
Blume helped me, writing about it, talking about it, because I'd be like definitely afraid of talking to anyone about that,
Mhm.
development and all of that. Another book, Philip Hall Likes Me, I reckon maybe,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Remember that.
Another book, not Judy Blume, but a black girl. And again, you have an idea, when you're attracted to someone, they're attracted to you. Are they attracted to you? Maybe they are. I think perhaps
Mhm.
maybe. And that title said it all, right? Philip Hall
Right.
likes me. I reckon maybe. Like, I'm
Maybe.
pretty sure he does, but I'm not sure. Like, and that just how to deal with that and just how to think about that. And also, like, you're not crazy. Like, other people are having these same kind of thoughts and these same kind of feelings.
Right.
And again, it just helps you to like deal with things, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm was a fairly quiet kid, like very much like internal dialogue driving myself crazy, right? Because I also have
Mhm.
perfectionism, and then also just you're the star in your own life, and you just think you're the only person in the
Only
world
one.
that's dealing with these things, right? Feeling this, and then reading about it, you're like, okay, this is
Mhm.
kind of normal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I remember those. I think my favorite one was either Tales of the Fourth Grade Nothing, or what's the one where he has Super Fudge. And I
Yes.
I remember doing a book report on Super Fudge, and as part of my I don't know, I wanted to give out I think it was chocolate covered worms. That was something in the book where the kid ate some worms, and so I took some Tootsie Rolls and rolled them out to look like worms, and I passed them out to my classmates to pretend like they were eating worms.
Oh,
I was all into, not only did I want to present my book report, but I wanted to make it memorable. And I think I was
so
always really,
creative.
yeah, yeah, I do remember doing
I'm
that. And
impressed.
yes, I was quite theatrical in my presentations.
That was great. I would have thought about that. Me, I'm like the type that will start talking about the book and then tell you all about the book and then in
Yeah.
chapter two. And then what happened in this, like, so I've told you the whole book. So that was more me. And my brother was like, be quiet, like enough.
Boy,
Let's talk about some
uh,
real things that happened, like with this book. Um, and I still really like stories and stuff like that too. So thinking about like how to like recreate some of this for your kid, right? Like have books, right, that have like crazy stuff
mhm,
in it, like,
right.
the worm sandwich or whatever it was. I don't exactly remember what they're called, but yes, they had like worms, recreating some of the things in the story. Um,
Exactly.
with my daughter, I love the library and because we could get two of those books. So I could read a book and she could read a book. I feel like it's so important for them to own the book.
Mm, yes.
Owning means that I'm not holding the book for them and pointing to the words for them. She has her
Right.
own book. She is looking at it. She's pointing at it. She's reading it.
Hmm.
I read a little bit, she reads a little bit. It's not a big deal if she makes a mistake, help her with the word, just creating a fun environment.
Right.
And then, as teenagers or preteens, right? Because a lot of times this is when they start reading the books when they're preteens, kind of
Hmm.
directing them towards books that you'll hear like that are great for preteens that'll approach these topics because kids aren't going to talk to you about it unless you just are one of those just gifted parents or just are lucky enough to have that open relationship with your child. Having a
Hmm.
book or something like that for them to talk about or to think about or process some of these feelings is so important.
Yeah.
um, and it'll
Totally.
help them fall in love with reading because it's
Mhm.
talking about things that they're interested in, because
Yeah.
ultimately the way we talk to them about it is probably going to be a little preachy, is going to be a little bit outdated, but being able to approach it through someone else's eyes and see how they deal with it is going to help them deal with it.
Oh, yeah.
So I think sometimes we think about reading as such a serious thing. It is serious, but we also have to think about like the social emotional benefits of
Yeah.
reading because it really helps the kids maybe not open up, but actually open up their mind. They may not open up to you, but they'll
Hmm.
open up their mind about how to deal with things. And it really does make them wiser because they're processing their
Hmm.
ideas, they're thinking about their thinking. They're looking at how someone handled something that was really bad, right, in the book, and then they're really making an idea about how they'll deal with this or how they'll approach it in a
Hmm.
thoughtful way.
The Rewrite Method and the Rewrite Method Workbook are your go to resource for helping kids to learn to fall in love with writing. It has the tips, tools, resources, strategies, and skill building activities to help kids fall out of writing hate and into loving to write. Get your book set today.
Right, right. I was with my goddaughter and she had a book and it said IRL on the cover. And I was like, "What is IRL?" And she said it's in real life. And I'm like, "What does that mean?" And so she's telling me a little bit about this book and I'm not going to give it away cuz I definitely want people to to read it themselves. But this book was so interesting how she explained um, the main character is a kid who is in Alaska and is online learning. And the kids in her classroom are, I guess I could tell you this part. They are, they're not alive. And I thought that's really creepy. Are you okay with this? This sounds really, really creepy. And she starts telling me a little bit about this book, but it's so fascinating about how she's she's in and developing relationships like kids do with these kids, and they're all online. And at some point, the kids have to go back into in-person learning, and that's when you discover that these kids are not kids; they're ghosts. And my
I
just to
think you're
see my
giving away too much. We
I'm
definitely need
but
to
you
have
but you
we need to have your niece on about this.
right.
Okay.
You still have to read the whole thing, but I'm saying how she was so invested in it and invested in the characters, and her eyes just lit up when she was explaining. She's like, and then this happened, and then this, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I realized, wow, just to have something that is fantasy and where you have to figure things out, and you're like, what's real and what is not real, and trying to figure out
Mm.
even what characters are real people, and are there hints and clues. And so it was, I just felt like it was such a mental exercise reading this book. I flipped through some of the chapters just to read it really quickly so I could be as excited as she was. But I just thought, wow, what an exciting journey books can be, and just giving
Yeah.
kids the opportunity to have books that are really interesting to them, and how she just was like, I can't wait for the next adventure. Like, books to her are such an adventure into like
Wow.
the unknown, and yeah, the creativity of it all. So yeah, maybe we should have her on, and
Yeah, I think we should. We haven't
have
had a
her
kid on
tell
the
us a little
podcast.
bit.
We need to have that.
Yeah, that'd be really fun.
Okay, I love that. So what were some books that you had like, that were like helped you like deal with some teen adolescence thing, anything like that for you, or that stood out for you that helped you process something?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I always go back to the fact that I was not an amazing reader, and I don't even think I enjoyed it as much as I didn't enjoy the pressure. I felt like there was a lot of pressure to
Mm.
read well and to be able to answer comprehension questions afterwards. Um, but I remember getting into poetry and really finding a lot of joy and a lot of comfort, because really the Shel Silverstein was like my favorite.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It was like little passages that packed a punch. It wasn't it wasn't a lot, it wasn't chapters and chapters and chapters of reading, but these little short stories and these little arts of work where words were important, and the flow and the rhythm of words. And I just remember thinking, hey, I'm kind of I think I discovered that I was more of an artist, and that there was something about the creation of, or how people put together words, that was really
Mm.
intriguing to me. And again, motivated me to keep trying, motivated me to learn new words and learn how to put words together in a way that rhymed or made a rhythm. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
his characters that he drew. And so I just remember, even trying to copy some of the characters and really finding a lot of joy in being a great artist. And even today, I'm pretty creative, and I like to draw. And it made me feel a little bit more comfortable in being a student and knowing that this quirky, kind of silly part of me, even though my teachers didn't really appreciate it, that maybe one day I could grow up to write poetry, or I could grow up to write a song or be an artist. And those were things that, I took a lot of pride in, and I was really, became kind of good at, you know. So,
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, for poetry, I really started like in fourth grade. Well, let's go to the roots, right? I did like little Easter poems and stuff like that. So that's one
oh
of the
yeah.
things I did in church is Easter
Mhm.
poems. And something weird about me is that I was a very like quiet child, like even have a little social phobia sometimes, like very socially awkward. Um, but one thing is that if someone asked me to like do a speech or to sing in front of people or something like that, I would do it. Like that wasn't an issue. But
Mhm.
which I think, you know, is not that common. And so you know, I remember like at church sometimes they would ask other kids to do things, or my parents didn't go to church with me when I was really little. So they didn't really have a relationship with me or my parent like to know me. So the other, families knew each other and the moms would visit each
Mhm.
other or whatever, and they would have play dates, and so they would be like, "Oh, I have a song for you. I have something because they knew each other outside of
Mhm.
church." But I know they didn't ask me, and I was like, "Hey," but I never said anything. I was very quiet. But when I'm talking to you about it, it makes me think like maybe they just thought I was very quiet or I'd be too shy to do it because it's not that
Mhm.
common to be quiet, to be a quiet or shy person, and then be like, "Oh yeah, I'll do a speech. I will read out loud. I will do," which I was just like happy to do and still like to do to this day. But obviously that's part of reading. You read those,
Mhm.
you read it repeatedly, you add
Mhm.
expression, you really learn what those words mean. And
Right.
then later on, when I got into fourth grade, I was in a speech contest doing Emily Dickinson. I don't even remember that poem. Because then the next year, fifth grade, I was in so Emily Dickinson, I was in Alaska. Fifth grade, I was in Pomona. I moved to Pomona with my mom,
Mhm.
and I was in a speech contest, and we did like Negro dialect, and I did Paul Laurence Dunbar. So I did a speech contest when I was doing it in the Negro dialect that Paul Laurence Dunbar was writing his poem in, and I did Angelina Johnson, right? So it was about Angelina
Wow.
Johnson come swinging down the line. So it was about like a wonderful, like she was a dancer. Um,
Uh-huh.
and then there was another one I did later on, which like when Melindy sings. And that was also with Paul Laurence Dunbar. Yeah, so I really got into
Mhm.
that, and that also it was like interpretive. So you that had to do your expressions. You had to, you used Negro dialect and understanding that, and also just
Mhm.
learning how to like learn more about the culture. Like people came to America not knowing English, right? And so they were just like using the language as best they could. And that's
Mhm.
just like part of, why some people speak the way they do. And,
Yeah.
over time is, over the generations, it's less and less of that, but it's just
Mhm.
understanding where it comes from. Yeah,
Oh,
so
wow.
so it was like my foray into like maybe do what I'm doing today, like podcasting and stuff, like
Right.
just finding my voice. Poetry was helpful in that, like speaking up for myself and and
Hmm.
you know, discovering, I had something to say and being able to articulate my feelings, emotions, share with other people. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And I was thinking too, being a kid that was very, I wasn't shy at all. But I needed maybe a different type of approach in terms of teaching me how to read. And so I remember thinking, when I become a teacher one day, I'm going to make sure reading is fun. I went to Catholic school, and it was not necessarily fun. It did not lend
Okay.
itself. I was very outspoken, a little bit of a wild child. Um, Sorry, Sister Dominic, John Dominic was her name. I
So Don
apologize.
Johnson from Miami Vice. No, just playing.
No, no. Yes, I probably gave that lady a few white hairs, but just thinking about how I learned and what made learning fun for me, I kind of think now as a teacher, those are the things that I incorporate for my kids. Like, I never want them to feel embarrassed if they can't read very well, and I always want to make it fun. We do lots of readers theater, and
Yes.
I create songs into our day and put the lyrics up on the the screen so they can sing along and like read the words too. Just try to make kids see that reading is, it's like a portal into whatever land you want to go to. Like, books can take
Mhm.
you anywhere, and to
Yeah.
get them excited about it, because I think that's what I needed. um and just the freedom to create and be creative. So I definitely look at myself now and think, yeah, I think my strengths were really born out of the things that were my weaknesses when I was a little kid.
That's dope. Like, it's a good way to think about it. And I think like bringing it back to like what can you do for your kids? I
Hmm.
think that might be a way in, right? Like poetry or reciting poetry, it might be a way in for them to like,
Hmm.
discover that they are more artistic, or discovering that they like to speak in front of others and they like to share their message or perform or whatever. So, even if you feel like they're quiet, just ask if they're willing to do it. They might be. Like, don't assume that kids won't, because one thing doesn't mean one another, right? Being quiet or shy in social situations doesn't mean that you're not happy to get up and perform
Right.
and, share your voice and your talent.
Mhm.
So just try it out. Like, ask them. Don't try to force them. You might do it for them to show them. You might take them where other kids are doing it, or maybe they'll just be comfortable doing it at home. They may not do it anywhere else. But it is a way that we're thinking about different avenues to help your kids to fall in love with reading and to get involved with
Mhm.
literature, and for it just to be beyond something that they have to do in school, right?
Yeah. 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 Make it a comic book. Like, turn something that they're learning into a comic strip. I remember I used to love drawing pictures and putting the little speech bubble of what
Yeah.
people, and that was another way to kind of make it something that was palatable for me. Like,
Mm.
let me create it in a way that makes sense for me as as an artist and as someone who's kind of creative, and uh, love the idea of creating a story or retelling a story in my own way. So I think that's really fun for kids too. Letting them get that opportunity to, or take the end of a story and turn it in, like, what if,
Yeah.
what could you do at the end of the story that would be totally different, that would totally turn the story on its head, and giving kids the freedom to do that.
Yeah, that really makes me think about, like, I was teaching, some people call it humanities. I actually never called it that, but I was a sixth grade English history teacher for about 10 years, or 10 years, 11 years or so. And one thing that we did is I did teach ancient history, English and history, so ancient history. And when we were learning about, for example, the Silk Road, I had them learn about the different perils, the different dangers. There were even bandits that came and stole things from people. The kind of animal that you would be traveling with through the different types of terrain. Sometimes you would have the Bactrian camel. Sometimes you would be on a mule or a horse or whatever. So after they learned about these things, then I told them they needed to create a Silk Road travel journal. They were going to prepare a journal to see, have characters like because we knew these different countries were interacting sometimes for the first time through this silk, for these travel trade routes. And so, like, what is your mode of transportation? Where are you going? What do you bring with you? What's your culture? You come from Italy? Are you coming from Egypt? Where are you coming from? What are the name
Hmm.
of your characters? And then we're going to have at least 4 journal entries to see, like, you got to have something wrong that happens based on what we've learned about. You know that there may be a problem with finding water. You're traveling through the desert. You know that you might get a bandit that goes after you, whatever it is, right? And they loved these things. And they, like,
Yeah.
sometimes they like to kill some of the characters, like, oh, he didn't make it. He went and looked out and found saw a mirage and kept going that way, and there really was no water there, and we didn't catch it,
R.I.P.
Yeah, so they loved to either kill the characters or, you know, figure out how they're going to take care of themselves, learn based on their learning. So getting really
Hmm.
creative about
Yeah.
something factual that they're learning about, but how they can make it into
Mhm.
like a fictional story, and they're really
Love that.
applying their learning instead of like, what are 3 ways that you might
Right.
have a problem in the desert, right? Instead of that, like, no, my character, Belial went on the desert. He brought his blah, blah, blah. We got caught in a
Mhm.
sandstorm, whatever it was. They just love to do that. And so,
Yeah.
that was a way like to bring into some creativity, but also it was very much fact based on what they were learning as
Yeah.
well.
See, I needed you as a teacher when I was a kid. That's what I needed. Because I was the one making up the story, and my teacher would be like, "That's not what it said." I'd be like, yeah, but wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
That's not what it said.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
great thing about teaching English and history. Like, you could put that narrative with that
Mhm.
informational, right? Like, that is
Yeah.
historical fiction. Like, we are going
Right.
to travel on the Silk Road. And they just loved it. It was one of their favorite things to do, to talk about it, think about the food that they might bring, what's unique to that region, who are they going to trade with, what they're
Mhm.
setting off on their mission to go and get. So it was one of the most fun we had teaching,
Yeah.
teaching and the kids learning about that.
Sounds like those, I Survived books, which I love, 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 love. I was already teaching when those books came out, but I would every time there was an I Survived book, I'm like, "Guys, we're gonna read I Survived 9/11 or I Survived the
I don't
Titanic."
know that. I don't know that. So we're going to definitely put that in the show notes. What are some I
Yeah,
Survive books? Okay, so
yeah,
tell us more
sounds
about that.
it sounds just like what you're talking about. They're nonfiction stories with a fictional character that's going through, escaping the falling towers of 9/11. It's not it could have happened, but the adventure is something that's completely made up. But it's in the time period when some actual events are really happening. So
Mm,
it's just a very creative way to approach, real history that could be dry and
yeah,
maybe distance from kids to
right.
make it a little more realistic. Because sometimes the characters are kids and you're following a
Yeah,
character through these different, you know, situations, and yeah, and it just brings it to life. It just gives it a different feeling because it's not just information that you're getting that you're kind of separated from, but you really get immersed in the experience. So
yeah.
yes, I Survive. Love those books. Love them, love them.
Well, I hope that you guys got some great tips and strategies to help get your kids to fall in love with reading and writing and literature, right? We thank you for joining us today. Make sure you're doing something today to give your children the competitive advantage. Thank you.
And thank you. This was great.
Thanks again for supporting the Falling for Learning podcast. New episodes go live every Saturday at 5 p.m. You can watch us on youtube.com at Falling for Learning or listen on all major podcast platforms such as Apple, Google, Audible, Spotify, and much more. For more resources, visit fallinginlovewithlearning.com. We really appreciate you. Have a wonderful week. Thanks again for supporting the Falling for Learning podcast. New episodes go live every Saturday at 5 p.m. You can watch us on youtube.com at Falling for Learning or listen on all major podcast platforms such as Apple, Google, Audible, Spotify, and much more. For more resources, visit fallinginlovewithlearning.com. We really appreciate you. Have a wonderful week.